In a limestone cave in southwest England, scientists found a human skull that had been carefully turned into a drinking cup, not smashed in anger, not left as trophy or warning, shaped, scraped, and polished with the same care a craftsman gives to a bowl he intends to use again. The people who made it were not warlords or executioners. They were starving, and it was winter. What they did next raises a question modern audiences still don't want answered. How far does a human body go to survive a cold that never ends? The popular image of ancient winter survival is a familiar one, repeated in documentaries, museum dioramas, and the marketing language of an entire modern diet industry. Ice Age humans, the story goes, were lean, resourceful hunters who tracked mammoths and reindeer across frozen tundra, wrapped in fur, living off high-protein meat and the occasional foraged root. This is the image behind the so-called paleo lifestyle sold today: grass-fed steaks, animal fat, the assumption that our ancestors thrived on meat alone because their bodies were built for it. The picture is one of triumph over the cold: clever tool-making, coordinated hunting parties, fires kept burning through the dark months, families gathered around them eating well-earned protein. It's a story of adaptation, not desperation. Anthropologists have leaned on this image for decades to explain why the human body seems so suited to eating meat, and popular science writers have used it to argue that our modern diets have drifted dangerously far from what evolution intended. It is a tidy narrative, and it isn't wrong exactly. Ice Age humans really did hunt large game. They really did rely heavily on animal fat and protein to survive brutal cold, since fat contains more than double the calories of protein or carbohydrate per gram, critical in an environment where every calorie mattered. But the tidy version leaves out what happened when the hunt failed. It leaves out what happened when a whole herd migrated somewhere else, when a hard freeze locked the ground for months longer than expected, when the fat reserves ran out before spring did. That gap in the story is where the real history lives. Start with the meat itself, because it wasn't as simple as protein equals survival. Nutritional research on lean game meat has shown that a human body relying on lean protein alone, without enough fat, can develop a condition sometimes called rabbit starvation, a state where the liver can't process excess protein fast enough, leading to nausea, diarrhea, and eventually death, even while the stomach is technically full. Arctic explorers in the 19th and 20th centuries documented this firsthand. The Canadian-born explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson wrote about experiencing it himself in 1906 while living almost entirely on lean rabbit meat in the Canadian Arctic. Ice Age humans would have faced the same biochemical wall. Meat wasn't enough. Fat was the currency that mattered, and in the depths of winter, fat was the first thing to disappear from the landscape. But that's the part most people never hear. To get it, ancient humans developed a process archaeologists call bone grease rendering, smashing long bones into fragments, boiling them for hours, and skimming the fat that rose to the surface. Sites across the world confirm the practice. The Clayses River mouth caves on South Africa's southern coast, occupied more than 100,000 years ago, show smashed animal bone consistent with marrow extraction. Much later sites like Bridge River in British Columbia, Canada, occupied by indigenous peoples for thousands of years, preserve dense concentrations of crushed bone fragments from grease-boiling pits. This wasn't a rare emergency trick. It was routine, exhausting labor, performed specifically because fat, not meat, was what kept people alive when the calories from a kill weren't enough to get a family through to the next one. It gets stranger, because animal fat wasn't always available either, and when it wasn't, The archaeological record shows people turned to a source that upends the entire cozy image of Ice Age life: each other. At Moula-Guercy Cave in the Rhône Valley of France, French paleoanthropologist Alban de Fleur published findings in 1999 describing roughly 100,000-year-old Neanderthal bones, bearing cut marks identical to those left on deer bones found in the same layer. The same butchery technique, the same marrow extraction fractures, applied to human remains as to animal prey. At Krapina, in modern-day Croatia, Croatian paleontologist Dragutin Gorjanović Kramberger excavated Neanderthal remains as early as 1899 that showed similar cut-marked and burned human bone, dated to roughly 130,000 years old, long debated by researchers over whether it represented cannibalism, ritual defleshing, or both. Here's where it gets darker. The clearest and most unsettling evidence comes from Gough's Cave in Cheddar Gorge, Somerset, England, home to remains from the Magdalenian culture dated to roughly 14,700 years ago, during one of the coldest, harshest stretches of the last ice age. In 2011, a team led by Silvia Bello of London's Natural History Museum published findings in the journal PLOS ONE, documenting human bones from the cave bearing cut marks, tooth marks, and deliberate fractures consistent with defleshing, marrow extraction, and consumption, processed with the exact same techniques used on the horse and deer bones found alongside them in the same layer of sediment. This wasn't isolated damage from a single desperate night. Bello's team identified the practice across multiple individuals, suggesting it happened more than once, over time, as a recurring response to conditions at the site. Here's where it gets darker still. In a follow-up study published in 2015, Bello's team went further, identifying a human skull fragment from Gough's Cave that had been deliberately shaped into a drinking vessel. The edges carefully trimmed and smoothed, the surface scraped clean of remaining tissue, a process that would have taken real time and technical skill, not the frantic damage of a starving group simply trying to survive one more night. The skull cup wasn't rage. It wasn't a battlefield trophy left as a warning to enemies. It was made using the same careful, repeatable process used to turn animal skulls into tools and containers elsewhere in the cave. Whatever happened at Gough's Cave, the people involved treated human remains, at least in that moment, with the same practical, almost workmanlike attention they gave to a deer carcass. That's the twist that changes how you have to read everything that came before it. The people at Gough's Cave were not monsters set apart from us by circumstance so extreme it excuses anything. They were skilled tool makers. They were artists. The Magdalenian culture is famous for cave paintings, carved antler tools, delicate engraved artwork found at other sites across Ice Age Europe. And in the coldest months, when the calories ran out, at least some of them processed human bodies with the same competence, the same technical fluency. They brought to every other task that kept them alive. Not chaos, not a single desperate breakdown, a skill. Slow down and sit with that. A skill they had, apparently, practiced enough to perform it well. And here is the twist within the twist. Isotopic analysis of the bones at Gough's Cave shows no clear signs of prolonged, severe starvation in the individuals who were eaten. No obvious stress markers you'd expect from bodies that had been slowly wasting away for weeks. Some researchers now suggest the cannibalism at the site may not have been a last resort response to imminent death by starvation at all, but a preemptive strategy deployed before conditions became truly desperate, when winter stores were simply running low and the math of survival made the decision early. News of Gough's Cave spread slowly, softened by museums into terms like mortuary practice. The Natural History Museum in London displayed the remains carefully, avoiding tabloid framing, but the evidence kept mounting. Antonio Rosas's reanalysis of El Cedrón cave in Spain, dated to roughly 49,000 years ago, confirmed Neanderthal cannibalism wasn't isolated to one cave or population. It recurred across Ice Age Europe. What survives is an object you can still see today, under glass in London. A bowl carved from a human skull, its edges worn smooth by hands that shaped it with real patience. It sat in that Cheddar Gorge cave for roughly 14,700 years before anyone found it. The unsettling part isn't that ancient humans sometimes ate each other in the worst winters. It's how familiar the logic looks once you strip away the distance of time. The same quiet triage behind every modern survival account, from stranded mountaineers to shipwrecked sailors. The skull cup isn't evidence of some different kind of person. It's evidence of what any of us might become, given the same cold, and enough time to get used to the idea.